food is something that we need to survive, and it's also something that a lot of us are passionate about. But for a while now, experts have been saying that a rapid change in eating habits is deemed necessary if we want to avoid a climate catastrophe. So, will climate change transform the way we eat? Does the future of food depend on some innovations in the lab? What will we be eating some years down the line, and what would be lost by then? Will overpopulation and resource depletion force us to make drastic changes in our diet? Or will veganism be the lifestyle of a dedicated minority or the obvious choice of an uncertain future? These are the many questions that we will be running through today. Marvin, actually, I would love to start off with you. Do you see an apocalyptic scenario when we're talking about the future of food, or are you optimistic about the direction that we're headed in?
I don't know, but probably not at the level of what is this movie again? Originally set in Australia, right? Where it's like barren desert, and then people fighting over resources. We're not going to see that, at least not anytime soon, right? But I think
that is very reassuring to know.
But I think it's really going to be a lot more and more difficult in the next few decades to come. Meaning that certain things that we are used to, certain luxuries that we have right now, might not necessarily be, will not be as accessible anymore in the next few decades to come. So again, I don't necessarily see it as apocalyptic, maybe, but I could be wrong, right? But at least the pace by which we're seeing some of these transformations, it's still going to be alarming in the sense that it will change our lifestyles, but at least for certain parts of the world. But certain parts of the world for sure will probably go through a more difficult time.
Simran, I'd love to go to you next. You've spoken extensively about some of the world's most delicious foods disappearing. What are these foods, and why are they going off our plates and baskets?
Well, climate change is a huge reason. Industrial farming is another huge reason. It's really the way we grow food, the way we live our lives is compromising our ability to eat well in the future. If you think about something like chocolate that came up, coffee came up as well. Chocolate grows, coffee and cacao especially grows in an equatorial belt, 20 degrees north and south of the equator when we think about cacao, which becomes chocolate. That area is going to be so hot, it will be inhospitable to growing the cacao that we cherish now, right? Or if we think about something like wine growing in particular regions now, the wine regions of today are not going to be the wine regions of tomorrow. So we'll see a shift, but we'll also have to see a disappearance because agriculture is going to take time to adjust. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges is that there's no sense of alarm around the loss of diversity and the changes that we're experiencing through climate change around food. A lot of people think, okay, we have to adopt a plant-based diet, but they're not recognizing that all foods are in peril because of the changes that we're going to experience and are experiencing.
What else do we stand to lose in terms of culture and tradition if these foods were to disappear? What does this actually mean in terms of the reality as you see it?
So it's very depressing, right, to talk about it sort of in this way of loss. But what we stand to lose is everything that's behind those foods. So anyone who said, oh, I'm starting my morning with a cup of chai and has a long memory tied to what that tea means, or recognizes how much they love a cup of coffee. And maybe they don't realize that coffee was born in Ethiopia, right? So it's the continent of Africa that brought us coffee. It's the continent of Asia that brought us, rice. It's the Fertile Crescent that brought us wheat. That the whole world is in our cups and on our plates, and that those stories matter. The traditions that we have and the connections we have to our family, to our friends, to our stories are connected to food. So for me, the idea of these things changing is like, there's a lot of grieving that goes on with that. Like there's also an opportunity for celebration. And that's why I wrote what I've been working on, my book and all of these things, because I don't want anyone to give up and, turn off. I want people to realize that we have a great chance in this moment as we recognize what's at stake to make changes so we don't have to talk about what we'll lose, but we're able to sustain and hold on to it.
Peggy, I'd love to move to you next. There are reports that say that we urgently need to adopt a plant-based diet, and how adopting a more plant-based lifestyle can lessen the impact of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You yourself have worked at the forefront of Hong Kong's plant-based movement. Why do you think this shift to plant-based diets is required so urgently?
It's clear that science has already shown that a meat-heavy diet is twice or three times more heavy on the climate in terms of energy inputs and loss of biodiversity and everything that is involved in factory farm industrialized agriculture. Plant-based, to me, where I started from, is about honoring the food that our farmers grow, and that honors nutrition, so that we're looking at food as something that is nourishing to us rather than something that we demand for high yield, high production, high profit margin from, which is now what I see plant-based has been more or morphed into, is something that is a bit more of a lab creation. And that's dangerous, I think, when it comes to plant-based, trying to push for a general understanding of what that means, where everyone now is being sucked into the marketing of plant-based foods. I think we need to slow down and really look at what are the effects of consuming meats that are heavily processed, or alternative meats that are heavily processed, compared to animals that are raised more regeneratively, that actually adds to the biodiversity of the land, that are done in a way that is honoring the culture and honoring indigenous people's knowledge.
So, Peggy, do you, in a way, is it about a back to basics approach? Is it about like going back to how, say, our grandparents used to eat some years ago and trying to mimic that in a way that in the future? And do you not see the lab as a place where innovation should happen, but in fact, it should go back to where it was some years ago? How do you see the way forward?
Well, what is the lab doing at this moment? It's really trying to create fractions of, micronutrients of something that used to be something. So when, we in the kitchen see our kitchens as labs as well. There are chefs out there who try to push for techniques and culinary techniques and cultures such as fermentation and culturing, making their own misos, foods that are done in certain ways, such as fermentation, actually adds to the nutritional contents of those ingredients. So yes, we need to be going back to where our roots are from. We need to be learning from our elders. We need to be incorporating that into how we create food moving forward. But that doesn't mean we need to, just live as hippies. We now have the science to prove that we can grow food regeneratively, like our ancestors have, but at the same time that protects the land, that ensures that carbon sinks are restored, that makes sure that biodiversity is restored, and it actually creates a lot of more, if not equal amount of yield as well. And we can utilize the new science to show that the old ways actually can sequester carbon, can restore biodiversity, can feed us more nutritiously, and such and so on. Yeah.
Hussein, this ties in very closely with the work you have been doing, which has been a lot on the ground level as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the biodynamic farming in the Philippines, and how that also pertains to all of us anywhere in the world?
Yeah, good morning to everyone. The ICRC initiative in the Philippines, we're doing this biodynamic and organic farming because, talking about of the future of our food plate, because with the climate change, there has been results of reduce to the yields of the farmers, and now these farmers are used to do the modern way, using genetically modified organism, fertilizers, and synthetic, something like that. And yes, given that our target beneficiaries are living from far-flung areas, and this population has limited opportunities. I mean, they have a very low purchasing power. So with this introduction of biodynamic and organic farming, this is a way of for sustainability, because it balances the ecosystem. It diversifies, so resources are just available around our surroundings.
But talking about issues, biodiversity and the loss of it is something, as I said, that you're heavily involved with. What does that really mean for us, our planet, and our future?
Most people think, when they think about biodiversity, they think about some beautiful plant that they've seen, or maybe some exotic animal, and they feel very sad when they think we're going to lose it. And so the loss, to answer your question, the loss of biodiversity specific to food and agriculture, what we call agrobiodiversity or agricultural biodiversity, is the loss of diversity in our soils, the loss of diversity in our seeds, the loss of diversity in the foods that we eat. You mentioned that statistic, 12 plants and 5 animal species. That's a statistic from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And to put that in perspective, because it's really hard to understand, we grow less than 1% of the 30,000 plant species that are edible. And 90% of the calories that we consume from meat, from livestock, comes from less than half of the 30 birds and mammals that we've domesticated for food. So you start to realize, like, there's all this opportunity. There's so much that we could be growing and savoring, and it's delicious and nutritious. So why the hell are we only growing and eating this much, right? That's the loss of agricultural biodiversity. What is the reason for this? And the reason is industrialization. And it goes back to what everyone has touched on, which is when you're growing food for fuel, or you're growing, and when I say fuel, I mean like, oh, it's just something, put something in your mouth because you need to get through the day. Or when you're growing food for profit and not recognizing this is the story of who we are. This is the stuff that sustains us. Eating is an agricultural act, as Wendell Berry, the farmer and philosopher, says, that this is something precious, right? Then you view it in this other way. Then it's cool to throw it away. 1/3 of our food in the world is thrown away or lost, right? Before it gets to our plates. That's all over the world. Or then you let the diet shrink. There's something now that's called the global standard diet: wheat, rice, corn, soybean, and palm oil, the same types and the same amounts. So that's why you see everyone is starting to look like each other. Everyone is starting to eat the same foods. The westernization of our fields, of our plates, is deliberate, because that ties again directly into industrialization. And the way we come back from that is through practices like biodynamic farming, or thinking about plant-based diets, but with a lot of thought and nuance. We're not talking about organic soybeans that are shipped, grown in monoculture, which is just not grown in a diverse system that takes care of itself, but grown in a way that's just one crop, one after the other, and one pest, one disease can wipe all of that out, right? So that's the thing that we want to get away from. We want to celebrate the diversity in ourselves. We want to celebrate the diversity in our ecosystems. We want to eat regionally, seasonally, remembering that there's a memory of something that we can only get at a certain time of year, and really celebrating that. And so that's what the reclamation of biodiversity is.
When you say that all of this is becoming standardized because of industrialization, but can I help you outline what that really means? Why are we focusing only on those specific foods around the world? I understand, of course, if it's about profits, but can you explain a little more how this connects?
Or we look at trade agreements that say you can grow this, you cannot grow this. And then we see a growth in all of our lifetimes, even though I'm older than all of you, that of processed foods. So all of a sudden it's grab a bag of chips, right? Put this in the micro, food should be ready in minutes, not in hours. And we're losing that deeper connection. As a culture, we've grown really accustomed to fast fashion, fast food, a fast way of life that doesn't necessarily look at the roots or the origins of all of these things. And so I feel like I'm not fully answering your question. I want to, but it's a little bit of a complicated answer. The evolution has been slow and fast, but it's really been toward more and more putting the control of our food into the hands of very few large scale agricultural businesses or agro businesses. And when we start to do that, the reasons behind it change and they become more geared toward profit than toward nourishment.
If I may add quickly to Simran, I think she really hit the nail on the head. And to say that it's really agro-industrial capitalism that we really need to focus on, because even the notion of heirloom and heritage, things that diversity, for example, is something that is largely quickly being commodified these days. Talking about heirloom, for example, and heritage, a few folks from the Philippines have written about how, for example, heirloom rice, which is now largely being celebrated as something that could potentially be regenerative and an endeavor that could really sustain and save cultures. It's quickly being commodified as well, and that's disturbing, right? In the sense that something that was considered to be radical a decade ago or a couple of decades ago is now largely something that is co-opted in many ways. And I also kind of wanted to add to Peggy's comment a while ago, like about vegetarianism, and I think and she really makes a really good point as well, that we also have to be careful in discerning trends like superfoods, right? These are food commodities that you'll find in places like Whole Foods, these large scale retailers of so-called organic food.
Of course, Peggy, I'd love to go to you next to talk about superfoods, but talking of superfoods that are commodified in India, for generations we've drunk something called haldi doodh, which is now being commodified as turmeric latte, and it's quite hilarious to us here because it's being sold for maybe 50 times the price, and it's a little sad that it also comes back to India in a way that is very fashionable and as a superfood. Peggy, what do you have to say about superfoods at large?
I would have to say that I'm sorry I've been a part of that system in terms of really trying to capture all the ingredients that are available around the world. As a chef who has been working in that plant-based field, the whole goal was really to bring a lot of these ingredients to give people knowledge of what teff is, how powerful of a calcium source they are, or like acai, it is a superfood. But over time, you start to learn that the system encourages us to really try to make profit out of everything and anything. And hence, I think that our exit out of the restaurant in 2019 was a perfect gateway for me to now fully focus on really speaking about the food systems issues, because as a chef, I bought into the system as well, and there's nothing wrong with serving a turmeric latte, but when we're serving that turmeric latte, maybe we need to take approach to where this came from, how turmeric was actually grown, how it was used in Ayurvedic medicine, or even TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, again, honoring that. I wanted to touch on something that Simran pointed out about biodiversity as well. We in Hong Kong import over 97% of our food, where we used to grow 65% of our ingredients here over 60 years ago. Now we only produce less than 1.6%. So we are, and to everyone else here who's from Singapore, are extremely food insecure and non-resilient when it comes to how we can actually sustain effects of climate change or damages of climate change. So many chefs here in Hong Kong are only here because they know the tastes and the ingredients of food that are flown from halfway across the world. So tomatoes from Japan or US beef. I don't know why anyone would want USDA beef, but that, or like quinoa from Peru, So people have lost the connection, and chefs have lost connection of what food actually tastes like. Tomatoes that are grown regeneratively in very good, healthy soil in in the local climate is as good as those fruit tomatoes grown in greenhouses in Japan.
Marvin, I'd love to know more from you in the sense of if it's a quick fire round, do you think if it's organic versus GM, where would you lie? And is organic food actually more sustainable?
These days, even the notion of natural is something that we're not really sure anymore, right? It's what does natural really mean? So I'm a pluralist in a sense that I recognize that there could be some value in GMO's role. I'm more concerned about how GMO as a technology is being rolled out, right? Certainly, there are many forms of GMOs. There's three big categories of GMOs. There's a GMO about making plants more resistant to herbicides, right? And that one I really find really super problematic. Okay, so I think there are nuances within GMOs. There are various ways of developing the technology as well. If it's developed by your big corporations like Monsanto, that could be problematic. But there are also GMOs that are being developed at the public universities, for example. And again, there is a wide spectrum of the different kinds of GMOs that you can do. I believe in the notion of what do you call this? Of the idea of precautionary principle, right? That at the extreme of that is you ban everything. So ban GMOs. But that's a spectrum as well. There's a spectrum of different ways that you could roll out the technology to be as safely as possible, or whatever that technology is. And GMO is just one of those examples, right? Not rolling it out too quickly enough, for example, having a lot of protections, making sure that you have pilot scale, and making sure the technology is developed in as many possible institutions, as many institutions as possible, would be part of that precautionary principle.
The system or healthy living of the future of food must be accessible even to low-income families. Usually, right nutrition are only available for the privileged. I also would like to address this in the sense of lab-grown food. Like, do you believe that this can also help bridge a protein gap as it exists in many parts of the world? Is there anyone here who would like to take it?
I mean, I would just untether that question because I think it's important to say that some of the hungriest people in the world are smallholder farmers and people who are working back of house in restaurants, fast food workers, like migrant laborers, like all of these people who feed us are the ones who are living at the margins. And so this notion, I think it's something that we as an eating world need to interrogate. Like, what does it mean that the very people who feed us can't feed themselves well? And that a big fight for like what good food should include is good wages. Rather than cheapening food, which is sort of the industrial model, let's make it cheaper and cheaper. I think really we need to focus on making sure that people are paid enough to feed themselves well, which is completely separate from the protein question, but I think important to ponder.
I would say that, with all of these beyond and impossibles, you can't ask a low-income family in Thailand to go vegan by eating Impossible burgers, right? They don't have the access to Impossible. They certainly can't afford Impossible. And generally, it's in these lower income or even, in areas where there aren't access to a lot of animal meats, that's where protein deficiency occurs. But in cities like ours, Singapore and Hong Kong, where we're one of the wealthiest cities in the world, we're not protein deficient. We actually eat way too much protein. So are we really creating these lab-grown products for our wealthy nations, or is it for really to actually solve the problem of protein deficiency and nutrient imbalance in the world? That's what I would question, really.